Hi, it's Nicola Bird here with the Little Peace of Mind podcast, bringing you a completely fresh, new understanding to help you find freedom from panic attacks, anxiety and stress, and experience peace of mind from the inside out. Today I want to introduce you to Daniel. Daniel's mum actually reached out to me and said, I think Dan would be a great interviewee for your podcast. And I was curious as to why, but I don't really like to find out too much before my guests come on the podcast because I like to explore with them, with you listening. So I got Dan on the call, and what really struck me from this interview we got to do together was, wow, imagine if we'd all come across this understanding at the age of just 19. Imagine if every 19-year-old had this understanding under their belt, what a difference it would make to the world. Listen to Dan's story and just be inspired about what's possible for humanity if we're able to share this understanding more widely. I hope this call inspires you as much as it did me.
Yeah, so for a few months now, Mum's been introducing me to these ideas of the principles. And I've really noticed that it's had a sort of big effect on sort of dealing with anxiety and or actually dealing with sort of any type of sort of negative emotion that I've felt. And one of the biggest examples has been, so just before university, so I'd say over a year ago, I had this really bad anxiety about going to my part-time work. And I would sometimes sort of have like panic attacks during like work if it got particularly stressful. And there was logically no reason why I should be, because I was good at my job. The people there were amazing, but still I felt this sort of crippling feeling of anxiety.
Have you ever had that before, Dan? Had you had that before, or was this the first time it had ever come to you?
No, I'd had sort of anxiety before, with just sort of a lot of things. Me waking up and going to school in the morning, that would sort of cause anxiety. But really, so the ideas that sort of broke me away from that was the sense that the feelings were coming from within rather than my job's causing me anxiety or school's causing me anxiety. It's that anxiety is this sort of illusion that I've created that I believe, or it's this thought that I believe, and it's a very convincing thought, but it's a thought nonetheless. And because of that, it has really no power. So I sort of understood that, not just understanding it in sort of a logical sense, but really sort of understanding it in like my heart. And that's where I found this sort of massive change. And it was all of a sudden, I just go into work and I wouldn't notice. I'd feel anxious. I'd kind of forget that I ever felt it. Then I'd kind of go in like a few hours in, I'd be thinking, oh, I'm not actually feeling this horrible like sense of being really sick and wanting to like run and hide.
It's like magic, isn't it?
Yeah.
You just look around and you notice everything's different.
Yeah, and it's interesting actually. So I study physics, and the idea of it, or the idea of the principles, came very naturally. In fact, I'd actually thought about some of the sort of key ideas way before Mum sort of introduced it to me. And the reason why I sort of think that is that everything in the world is unbiased. So it's nothing in the world is out there to target you specifically or to make you feel bad. So the laws of nature, they're just there. They're not negative. They're not positive. So when it came to the ideas of the principles, then that kind of really stuck with me, just because it says that everything, all the kind of connotations that you put on, say, negative or positive experiences, they just come from you rather than actually intrinsically being there.
Wow. So on a physics level, right? So on a physics level, you saw that.
Yeah, so physics, philosophy kind of level.
Really makes sense. I've never heard it described that way before. I love that. That just makes so much sense.
Yeah, and that's why I picked it up very quickly.
Yeah.
just because I'd already kind of thought that in a way.
So tell me kind of, so when you get anxiety at work, did that stop you going to work, or did it just, was it
It
just
never
ruining?
stops me, but it affected my performance a lot. I remember there was one time where, so I was working in a cafe, and it would get very busy on Sundays, and I would work there, and I was on the till at one point, and I remember there was like a malfunction with the system, and an order didn't go through, something like that's not my fault. And I remember later, like hearing that like a customer was really kind of angry because of it, and then I remember going off and like having a sort of mini panic attack just because I was thinking, oh my God, like this is all sort of like crumbling down, um, like I'm going to get fired or whatever, or I'm going to get shouted at. And so all this stuff, so that I was worrying in my head. And that would really kind of slow me down and make me feel like physically exhausted.
Yeah, really tiring. It is. I know, I've been there.
Yeah.
Like you're basically spending the whole time at work trying to hold it together and hoping no one else notices, and everyone else thinks you're normal, and
inside you're like screaming.
Hold it all together. Yeah. Go. I'm sure that. I wonder if they can tell. And like internally, so you put on a kind of a really calm external face, but inside it's like everything's screaming inside because you're so worried and panicky. I remember that. I really remember that. So Dan, for you, what happened then? Did your mum just sit you down and say, look, Dan, I've got something to tell you, right? There's these three things called mind, thought, and consciousness, and give you a talking to about the principles? Or was she more subtle than that? Did she kind of slip the principles into everyday conversation? Like, how did it go? Like, I'm just being nosy now. How did the conversation go?
It's interesting, actually.
Or did she drag you along to an event against your will and make you
so
somebody?
Yeah, because I'm obviously not a client of my mum's, so and so she comes to me like all the time with saying like, oh, I've had this really good insight, or I've had this kind of, and ways that mum talks to me sort of normally is I think in a sort of slightly sort of coachy way, which is great. And just I get free coaching, so
I'm glad you appreciate it. My kids are always, don't try and coach me.
Yeah, no, at some points I've been like, don't try it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, so I think she came to me and just said like, oh, I've like sort of learnt about these sort of really cool things, and so we were sort of talking about it. So she did sort of introduce them as sort of three principles, and as she was describing, I was thinking first like, oh God, what cult she got into now. But when she was describing them, I thought, yeah, like that makes sense. Like, yeah, I thought that was just sort of what everyone sort of. But then, like her sort of saying that and introducing as an actual thing, kind of made me sort of go back to my own sort of understanding and actually kind of reinforced it. So actually, I started to believe it more, and then. Then all the changes happened after that.
I think it's true, Dan, for so many people, because the principles are true and we all know them at some level. It's not like we have to learn them, right? It's like we hear about them, and then you have the benefit of youth on your side. Like many of us have so many years of like living in the illusion that the world is outside in. We have just got so much evidence as far as we're concerned, and so many experiences where it looks that life is coming at us and we're experiencing it from the outside in. But when we see it, and I know my kids, when they were really young, some aspects of it they could just see, and they were like, I would explain things to them and they would say, well, yeah, and like it was so obvious to them. And I think that's the beauty of it. When we get it, we see, oh yeah, I've always known that.
There's a analogy that I kind of thought of, again, so it goes back to sort of a sciencey sort of thing. It's a bit like saying before Newton, before he wrote down the laws of gravity, before then the laws of gravity still existed, but they hadn't been kind of analysed in the way that he did it. So it's always been there, it just hasn't been described. So in a similar way, the principles has always been there, but it's only been recently that we've actually been able to put words to it. and actually go back to it.
So there are people who will listen to this podcast who won't know what we're talking about when we talk about the principles. So, and I know this is a horrible question to ask anyone because it's impossible to answer, but if you were trying to describe in your words, like what the principles are, like how would you describe it? It might be through a metaphor, it might be just, I don't know, what words come to mind for you? And if someone says to you, well, what are these principles, Dan?
I would say from my own experience, and the best way to talk about it is through your own kind of experiences, is that the every kind of emotion or every sort of reaction to an experience or an event is not because actually no, I give the analogy of a conference or like a meeting, because Mum gave that to me and it made sense. So imagine two people going into a meeting, and one of them thinks it's absolutely awful, they're all sort of bickering and no progress was done. Someone else comes out of the meeting saying, oh, that was amazing, it was like really enthusiastic and we got loads done. So two people had very different experiences. Now they both went to the same meeting, so it's obvious that the meeting had nothing to do with their perception of it. It's those individual people that came up with these feelings of either kind of enthusiasm or sort of anxiety or whatever. So that's an analogy that I've used a few times with friends trying to sort of explain it. But I think that kind of, it shows that it's inside out rather than outside in. So
yeah, so simple, isn't it? Such a simple concept. Actually, the metaphor I have that's very similar to that is I think about watching football with my family, and my husband will be supporting one side and he'll be shouting and cheering when the goals go in one end, and my kids will be shouting and cheering when the goals go in either end. They're not really fast, and I can care less. It's like I don't even know what's going on. But we're all watching the same football match on the screen. The same event is happening, and yet we all have completely different experiences of it in the room. It's what I love about this is that you hear about it. You hear that your experience isn't coming from the circumstances, it's coming from inside of you. And then if you go out and look in life, the evidence for that truth is everywhere.
It is.
Everywhere.
And once you really kind of notice it, and I think the greatest power of principles is observation. So that's all you have to do. When I've said to friends who has anxiety, I said, next time those feelings come through or those thoughts come through, just observe them. Just notice that they're there, because just by doing that, you take the kind of the real kind of heaviness out of that, and you take the sort of the pain out of it, and it just becomes a thought. And also another thing to add about what the principles are, it's about emphasizing that thoughts are transient. And I love the idea of transient thought, like clouds crossing the sky, or it's about no matter what you're kind of feeling or thinking right at that moment, it's going to pass. Just everything does, whether that's happiness and there's a quotation which I really love. I believe it was created by a philosopher who was asked to create a sentence that would make you feel happy when you feel sad, and make you feel sad when you feel happy, and this too shall pass.
Yeah.
So, and that really sort of sums up what transient thought is.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that's so helpful to know it on a deeper level. Like when you're actually having a panic attack, like, you know it's going to pass, and you can say to yourself, it's going to pass, it's going to pass, it's going to pass, it's going to pass, right? But it doesn't feel like it at the time. It feels like you're telling yourself, like, you know, when you say, calm down, it's not helpful, right? But it's something about looking and seeing and knowing that it is, truly it is, every time it is, every time it has been, knowing that you always come out the other end of it, and seeing that it's just like a massive loads of clouds across the sky thought storm.
Yeah.
The sky always clears.
When you have a snow globe and you're trying to settle all the sort of the snowflakes in it by shaking it even more.
Yeah.
The best thing to do is let it settle.
Yeah, that's so tempting when we're having a panic attack or we're feeling anxious. It's to get in there and try and work out, well, why is it happening? Oh, it's happening again. How am I going to stop it happening next time? Oh, this means I can never go back to work. This means I can't ever go back to college. This means I can't ever get a job. This means it's never going to go away. This means that I have this all the time. Those thoughts are the experience of the snow globe shaking.
Yeah.
You know, and to get in there and try and physically stop the snowflakes from moving around by shaking the globe even further just seems nonsensical.
No. And there's no way once you're in a panic attack, there is no 5 steps to calming yourself down. There's no kind of easy trick to stop feeling anxious or whatever. At that moment, it's best to not do anything. It's to not abuse yourself even more by kind of saying, oh, like, I'll never do this, or I'm useless, or whatever. It's just sort of doing nothing and let it run its course.
I think so many people come to me and they say, okay, this is all very helpful, but what do I do when I'm having a panic attack? And I think the best thing I can do for people is point out to them that that's so like downstream, if you like the panic attack is the last step in a whole chain of what goes on. So you have thought and you have feelings, and that's all brought to life by consciousness, and the byproduct is a panic attack. And it's almost like I wrote a blog post, it's almost like it's like the snot in a cold, right? That's running out of your nose. It's like, there's nothing I can do to stop the snot, but we can look upstream. The more upstream we look at, you know, in the case of a cold, I suppose your health and your rest and your vitamins and all the rest of it, right? In that example, the more we look upstream and take care of that, you'll find the snot takes care of itself, and you just over time, you'll have less snot. But if you're coming to me going, what do I do about the snot? There's nothing I can do to help you with that. It's too late.
Yeah.
But when you go and look upstream, keep looking upstream. And then what you'll find is that it's almost like your brain rewires itself. And you just end up with less snot. So you have to carry around less hankies, and there's less snot attacks, as my kids call them, to deal with, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was talking to Kim yesterday, and she was saying about how our body has a physical immune system. And if they're taking that analogy, it's like, so when someone comes to you with a cold or with flu, saying, oh, how do I get over this flu? It's just like, it's a bit too late. But if you change your kind of your lifestyle or whatever to mean that you're less likely, then that's going to do more help. So with your mental immune system, it's doing this. It's preventing actually having a panic attack in the first place. Because once you've got it, it's pretty hard to shift that thinking. Near impossible. But if you do all this, if you realize this stuff beforehand, then it's just a lot less likely that it's ever going to happen in the first place.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, when we've got this continuum, so many of us, you know, this is what happened to me, my guess is you too, and everyone else who has panic attacks. We're so focused on what do I do when I have a panic attack? So that's the scariest thing. And what, I suppose, if you're listening to this, Dan and I are pointing to is there's a bigger understanding, there's like a bigger perspective, there's a bigger picture, that if you can look towards the other end of that continuum is far more helpful. And the panic attack is a detail that gets taken care of all on its own.
Yeah.
It's really hard to understand when you're in the middle of it, but I suppose that's the best way we have. The cold analogy, I think, is the best way of pointing to it. If you don't understand what snot is, geez, that's scary. It's like, oh my God, it's green. My brains are coming out of my face. Help me. That's terrifying.
They think that you'll
right?
never be
But when
well
you
again.
understand, yeah, you'll never be well again, and my brains are coming out, and they're never going to stop, and it means I can't go to work because I've got green stuff all over my
Not to
face,
burn
right?
anymore. It's all
So
my, it's all,
no one's going to want to go out with me. No one's going to want to be around me. I've got green goo all over my face, and we go into an absolute panic about it. But if you understand what snot is, right? If you understand what snot is, where it comes from, how it gets caused, you just stop being scared of snot.
yeah.
And that's what happens with panic attacks, is like, if you understand what they are, where they come from, that they're not harmful, even though they might look scary if you don't understand them, in the same way that snot does if you had no idea what that was, then it's that we point to, like getting a better understanding of what it is, where it comes from. And then the panic attack is just like snot. It's just something that happens. It's uncomfortable. It could be unpleasant, but it doesn't have to scare you anymore.
No, and you'll know it'll pass.
Yeah.
It always does. Because
In the same way that you do with a snotty nose, right? You know it's not going to be there forever. It's inconvenient and it's uncomfortable while it's there, but you don't get freaked out by the thought this is going to last forever.
No. So I think with psychological health, it's a lot more difficult because we can't physically see it. As human beings, we're kind of evolved to deal with sort of tactile things, with things that we can see and touch. But when it comes to our own health, I don't know if it's sort of stubbornness or if it's like, I don't know if it's sort of ignorance or but it's almost just like, if I feel if I'm constantly anxious, I'm just an anxious person. Or if I feel sort of depressed at this moment, that's just how I am and I'll just live with that. But once you kind of take this new sort of understanding, I mean, it's a whole different way of viewing the world. Once you kind of properly realize that, you think that, oh no, actually, so when I feel sort of anxious and stuff, that's just a moment in time that I'm feeling like this, and then in another moment I could be like really, really happy, and that's fine. Like, it's okay.
Do you know what, Dan? I just think when I'm talking to you, how old are you now?
I'm 19.
Like, there are so many of my clients that takes them till they're 60 to find this understanding. Like, I think it's so cool when people are young and manage to stumble across this, because you've got the rest of your life with this understanding under your belt. That's awesome. Now, in a practical level, like what difference do you think it's going to make to you, or what difference has it made? What difference do you think this is going to make in your life going forward, having this understanding?
I mean, it's going to have a profound difference in every single aspect of my life, really. There's literally no sort of, say, for example, university at the moment. I don't need to feel sort of overwhelmed, or I don't need to, if I've had a particularly difficult day, say doing labs, sort of experiments and stuff, and it's not gone well, then I would normally come out of it feeling kind of very sort of defeated and like angry with a raging headache. But now I don't have to, or if I do, then I don't have to cling on to it. I don't have to say like, oh, I'm just going to be angry for the rest of the day now, and like that's all I'm going to feel. And it's now I can feel that, but then I can let it go.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, so yesterday I had an experiment which went terribly, and I was really sort of in a bad mood. And I had a really bad headache, and just right here, and just throbbing. And when I got home, I took a few minutes to sort of be mindful or sort of meditate. And it was weird because it just suddenly disappeared, that headache.
Yeah.
Like it was the weirdest experience, just because I could feel it just suddenly just disappear. And like my also, I knew that at a moment, like my thinking just completely switched. And I felt a lot more kind of energetic and more kind of upbeat.
See, so with that, let me ask you about that. So if someone's listening to this podcast, what they might hear is that you said, so I switched my thinking. And you didn't say that. She said my thinking switched. There's a big difference, right?
That's a big difference.
That, yeah. What do you say? What can you say about that? There's a difference between saying I switched my thinking and my thinking switched.
Yeah. Saying I switched my thinking means that you actually have control of it, which you don't. Yeah. It's impossible. Like, this isn't about controlling your thinking, because I mean that's impossible. Yeah. Whereas you can influence your thinking, you can sort of nudge it in the right direction. So I did that by taking a few minutes to sort of be mindful and just close my eyes and just sort of like slow down a bit. So I influenced my thinking towards a more positive route. And then it naturally switched by itself. I mean, it could have been that I could have done that, I'd been sort of mindful for like 5 minutes and nothing happened. That could have been the case. And I could have been just sort of like, oh, okay, then fine, I'll still be sort of annoyed for a bit more. But it just so happens that I kind of went back to this sort of like balanced place. And so that's when the thinking switches itself.
Yeah. And if you look, it always does it itself. I think that's part of the problem with anxiety. When we're in a panic attack or we're feeling anxious, we try and change our thinking. We try and calm ourselves down. We try and talk ourselves down off the ledge, don't we? And actually, that's shaking the snow globe, isn't it? Whereas sometimes we just simply know something that will help us calm down. Like, you knew to just go and sit and meditate, or sometimes we just know to go for a walk, or we know to go to bed, or we know to make a cup of tea, or we know to switch the telly on, or sometimes we just know an activity, and in that activity we find that we get distracted and our mind switches all on its own, right? And sometimes it's just, we don't have to do any of those things. It's the natural capacity of the mind is to switch itself back to health.
There's an analogy which I sort of think of. I think of a bit like a pendulum. So it swings sort of naturally, it swings back and forth, and it's very happy to do its sort of own thing. And that's like our well-being, our sort of natural state of rest in a way. That's the place that we were sort of born in, and that's when we're content or when we feel serene, that's where we are. But all these sort of thoughts and overcomplications, they're a bit like sort of extra sort of strings or sort of stuff that gets in the mechanism which stops it from swinging naturally. And so having all these sort of, that's why often when you have panic attacks, like after sort of a really hard day, or there's just been so many thoughts going in and out of your head, you've got a million things to do, that's all these sort of extra strings and extra sort of gunk that's in a way to stop you from this natural sort of nice place to be. And what I see the 3 principles is doing, it just cuts all those extra sort of strings away, or it cleans out sort of the gears, so you can more easily just go back to your natural sort of place of well-being.
Yeah. And what you shared as well about being in the lab, or being in college now, being in university now, is what I hear and what you say is there's a sense of resilience there that maybe you didn't have before when you were in school, when you said you had anxiety, earlier on in school. And that's what I think is one of the gifts of resilience, because we think that the part of anxiety is thinking that we're not going to be able to cope with whatever imaginary situation we can think up and scare ourselves with. So we think, for me, it was like, if I go more than 26 minutes from my house, right, an arbitrary number, but it was, if I do that, I won't be able to cope. It's like I've left my comfort zone. And when I was stuck at home, it was like if I left, I couldn't leave the house, or I couldn't go on a motorway, or I couldn't drive to my mum's, or whatever it was. It was thinking that I wouldn't be able to cope if this and that happened. And I think with the principles, what it gives us is a fundamental knowing of our own resilience and knowing that we're okay no matter where we are, no matter what we're doing, that we can handle it.
Yeah.
That's huge, isn't it? Because to go from in school where you're scared, or for me, when I was feeling anxiety and feeling like I might not be able to handle what came next, and then living in fear of that story playing in my head. When you know that you can handle whatever life throws at you, you don't have to think about it anymore.
No, it just becomes part of your character. So during sixth form, I found that was quite difficult. It was a hard course. I didn't have like a close group of friends, and just so that it was so easy and so comfortable to go back into this place of anxiety where you're constantly in your own head. But having this sort of resilience, the ability to, it's not just about believing in yourself, but it's believing that you have the potential to be without it, be without the anxiety.
Yeah.
That you can be, you can have a character that doesn't have that sort of little kind of part of it that you don't want, that you can be that person.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing idea. And once you believe that, then there's not really anything that could you can't go back.
Yeah.
So once you have this understanding, it's very difficult to go back into that place where you're deep in those feelings of anxiety.
Well, yeah, it's once you understand what snot is, it can't scare you.
No, you can't forget it.
No, you can't. It becomes part of your body. So it's something that can never be taken away.
Yeah.
Unlike, sometimes people come to me and ask me about taking medication and things like that. And then they feel like they're okay while they're on the medication. But if that were to get taken away, they'd be right back to ground zero. Whereas that's what I love about this is just one simple insight. Like you saw that the anxiety was coming from you, not outside of you. And one simple insight, and you've got that for life. And it took a heartbeat, and there were no side effects apart from nice ones. Yeah. And there's a simplicity in that I just love, a simplicity and a permanence in insight. That how cool is that for the rest of our lives? We get to go out and play and not be restricted by the things we think we might be scared of, or that we might be able to handle, and to not have to think about any of that. Imagine how much better your results at university are going to be. Imagine how much better your working career is going to be when you don't have all that noise and clutter and anxiety and fear and all the rest of it, and you can just go out and be in the world without having to be fearful. It's like a whole different, it's like night and day compared to your experience at school, compared to the rest of your life going forwards.
Yeah, it's a whole different filter that you put out. It's removing the filters over your eyes that you kind of see the world through. You're seeing it for what it is, what the world actually is. I mean, I like to think of it as the simplest state of being. It's like the simplest way to live, which is the best, because you can't overcomplicate it. If you want to talk to your boss for a new position that's opened up, but you're scared, then you can do it, because really there's no reason why it's a bad thing. There's so many things all making new friends. You might be sort of anxious going to a new event where you don't know many people, but it's just an event with people. That's not scary. It doesn't have sharks in it. It's not
tigers. No.
Yeah. All these things, they shouldn't be scary. Life shouldn't be scary. You know how people say that, life is scary, or the real world's terrifying. It's not.
Yeah.
It's that filter, that scary filter that you put on it.
Yeah. I love that, Dan. I think the way you talk, I love the science way you talk about it as well. And I love the simplicity. I'm a simplicity girl at heart. That's my big thing. And I love the simplicity with which you see this. It's just it's not a big drama. There's no bells and whistles. It's what I love about this is stripping away. I love the pendulum example that you used there, because you don't have to add more stuff in. I think when you've got anxiety, you've got so much stuff in your head anyway, and then you read books and try and find solutions and just add more stuff on top of more stuff. I'm shaking the snow globe again. But when you think back to that pendulum example, this understanding is a stripping away back to the bare bones, like you say, to the simplest way of being, without all the clutter, without all the noise. Life's just quieter and easier and more lighthearted and more fun and all that good stuff.
Yeah, it's so much better. I've noticed that almost sort of physically my sort of sight and my sort of hearing and everything's got better in a way, just because you're present a lot more. Because you know how you're sort of walking along and you're constantly kind of just thinking in your head. Almost you actually forget like you're actually seeing anything, and you can block out all your senses. Whereas now, you can actually sort of, I know, just walk along the street and then actually properly see things without having that. It's really weird. I was walking today, and normally when I walk back from uni, I'm thinking about all this, like some stuff that I need to do when I get back.
Yeah.
I just, like, in my head, it just sort of fell quiet. It's almost like, you know, in a film where you have the background music, and when that suddenly goes quiet, it's a bit weird because that doesn't normally happen. And you really notice everything that's happening in the scene. It's a bit like that. The background music or the background thinking sort of dies away, and then you actually see everything in more detail.
Yeah. It's just a richer experience of life, isn't it?
It is.
Instead of worrying about all the illusions, you actually get to really experience life as it is.
Yeah. It's not that complicated.
Yeah, I'm getting that from you. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with me.
Oh, thank you.
I really appreciate it, being able to create this podcast from a totally different perspective than anyone I've spoken to on this before. And I have to say a big thank you to your mum for introducing us. She's done a good job.
Yeah.
I just think it's amazing. I think one of the things people can take from this as well, it's like, when we see this for ourselves, what an amazing difference it can make to the people around us. You know, like you've seen this because your mum has sat down and told you this. And so many people, you know, the name of Jack Pransky's book, somebody should have told us, right? So many of us didn't have parents who had any idea about this stuff. So there's now going to be a whole generation of people that get impacted because their parents are aware.
So I've met one person my age, and he knows about the principles, and it's been interesting talking to him, someone from my age and my generation. And I just hope more people from my generation understand this, whether it's not formally through the 3 principles, but just get it. Because if everyone knew this in the world, then there would be no reason for any conflict, anything negative. There'll just be progress and prosperity.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful note to end on.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
If you're curious to find out more about what I've been talking about on this episode, the best place to start is to go to alittlepeaceofmind.co.uk, and there you'll find my audio, Freedom from Anxiety, and you can listen to that. Is the best place to start to get some of this understanding into your own bones so it can start making a difference to your life. Until next time, I'll speak to you later.